Okay, I'm taking you to my secret spot today because today is a very special day. Why is it really special? Because I have some liver pate right here that Judi had made. And I have some egg yolk crepes. And why do I show you this? Because I'm exploring the whole topic of uric acid. And right now, this is a Paleolithic meal. I'm not saying I always eat Paleolithic, it just happens to be both of these things. This is organ meat, let's be clear. This is beef, not calf, liver pate. We've, Judi cooked them up, blended them up. I love it. Put some onions in and spices and so nice. And these are egg yolk crepes. They could be waffles or anything. This is my snack. I just love this. So you're gonna watch me get these things together. I'm gonna get out a spoon. And I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this in just a second. It's real straightforward. I eat like a slob, not always, but I'm going to do that now since that's the only way I can figure out how to do it. And I spread the pate in the crepe. It's not really a crepe, I call it a crepe. For those who know crepes, this is definitely not a crepe. And this is wonderful. This is my high choline, high whatever. It is just so, so good. Yet, I told you I had gout a couple times, and yet why am I eating organ meats? My gosh, I shouldn't be eating this, right? According to that. But the whole point of today's podcast is that I'm going to show you, at least start to show you, that gout and elevated uric acid is nearly and entirely an inside job. In other words, inside, this is outside. My diet of delicious organ meats really has almost nothing to do. If I was really close in all the other things we're going to talk about, and I had this, maybe it would put me over to too much, elevate my uric acid to the point that it's a problem. But really, it's not an issue. I don't have it every day. I'm lucky if I have it once a month. It's probably once every 6 weeks that I have a whole bowl of this, and it doesn't last very long. Okay, so what I want you to remember is that we've talked about the 3 phases of gout increasing since the Paleolithic time, right? Oh, another bite coming up. So the 3 phases. So we had Paleolithic 25 million years ago, and then we had the agricultural revolution, which was 10,000 years ago, and the Fertile Crescent and the cradle of civilization and all that, and how sugar arrived to the Middle East really 600 to 800 AD. So what happened from the beginning, phase 1 was from the beginning of agriculture. So we're saying that's 10,000 years ago, and animal domestication. And going forward, all the way up, let's call it 1000 AD to be simple about it, right? So what did they eat? Well, they had gradually more and more domesticated animals. So they had the pigs, they had the sheep, they had the goats. Cattle came from India, and pigs were semi-local. So that was it. What they didn't have, they didn't have any fructose. Really, any fructose. It would be in honey, wherever they could find that. That would be an extreme treat. Maybe they had some berries around, maybe some fruits. Fruits were pretty primitive back then. So if you were reading the Bible, for instance, nobody was having a salad. They didn't all get around and have a salad. They always talk about breaking bread together, because what they had was grains. They had grains. So grains are starches, okay? So starches are broken down to glucose only. Starches, so for 10,000 years, for the most part, they had starches. They had all sorts of breads. Maybe they could make whatever they called a cake back then. They had plenty of alcohol. We've been through the whole alcohol thing. So that's the setting for phase 1. The worst thing that could cause elevated uric acid, so we're using gout because we don't know about uric acid back then, was alcohol. And how alcohol is broken down in the body. The liver ends up making fructose. I skipped 15 steps, but I'll get into that later in the video portion of this. It got into fructose. That's where our fructose came from. Alcohol as a side product of alcohol, of really too much alcohol. A little bit's not bad. As Paracelsus said, it's the dose that makes the poison. It's the amount that you have, not the thing that you have. Low doses of everything you can pretty much tolerate. When the dose gets too big for your ability to break it down, to metabolize it, it becomes a problem. So here we are now. We are strictly on a diet of carbs, yes, but the carbs are starches. There really is very little in the way of leafy green vegetables. That was no proof of that, actually. It was starches, it was bread, matzah, if you will, flatbread, and so on. And that was it for certainly a number of thousands of years. And then they learned to ferment grains, which beer came along. All sorts of beer. We showed you how 5,000 years ago, how many different kinds of beer did they have in Egypt? All through the Mediterranean, beer was the thing. And actually it even went beyond that. The Muslims, Islam brought it into distilled liquors, but that was again about 1000 AD. So we had wine, that was about 7,000 years ago. So plenty of alcohol was flowing and starches. Alcohol and starches. So the only source for fructose other than that dietary fructose, sometimes honey, if they have that at all, which is probably not much for the average person, maybe some fruit, not much for the average person, but it was their alcohol consumption was, when it was metabolized by the liver to make it so it's not toxic, created fructose. Fructose then was either metabolized into glucose, because that was a possibility. We've talked about that, right? So here you go. We had that pathway of, if we have too much glucose, we ate too much breads, too much carbs, only glucose, only glucose. Well, there was a relief valve. There was a pressure valve that could convert that to fructose, to get the glucose out of the bloodstream, right? Because when glucose went too high, then insulin came in, and if it kept on being too high, then insulin got higher, and you get what they call insulin sensitivity. But the escape valve was, it can be converted to fructose, and from fructose, it can go off and be made into fat. It was like a one-way street if things got to be too much. So when the dose of carbs going to glucose got too much, it went over to fructose. Okay, good enough. Uh-oh, then what happened? 1000 AD, sugar. Sugar specifically, we have to say sucrose, because sugar's used loosely, so sucrose is what showed up in the form of sugar cane, right? We talked about the Papua New Guinea, to India, to China, and so on and so forth, in the Middle East about 600 AD, and then up to Scandinavia and Europe a couple hundred years later. But sucrose has that glucose, and it came coupled with fructose. So now that was really the first bona fide, high quantity, when it started to get popular, source of fructose. So now they had the glucose from all the starches, which was really all the preceding 7,000 or 8,000 years, right, since the agricultural revolution. Now they had more glucose that they loved, and the fructose. So now the body's going, wait a minute, we got the alcohol that you guys are clever enough to figure out, and now we're having more fructose. Things are starting to fall apart. The frequency of gout, the drumbeat of gout and elevated uric acid is getting higher. It's a slow drumbeat at this point. So the first culprit was primarily excess alcohol coupled with enough carbs of the starches, which is glucose, right? So it piled on. And now sucrose came in, which was more glucose and fructose. So that's why this whole thing is called fructose toxicity, or this whole theory of elevated uric acid, hyperuricemia, is based on fructose, because fructose really didn't exist until the sugarcane came along, until sucrose came along. And boy, did it come along. They loved it in China, they loved it in India, they loved it in the Middle East, and I told you about it, they made a whole mosque of sugar. That's how impressive it was. It was worth its weight in gold, literally. So that was phase two. Phase two was the alcohol making fructose. It was the sucrose coming 50-50 with fructose, getting to be too much. And the third phase is the phase we're living in right now, of really the last 70 years. But I wanted you to understand that how can I dare, with a history of gout, how can I dare have liver pate, and I love it, and egg yolks is not so much of a and a grieving food. But putting these together, it makes for a fairly high purine consumption, intermittent. But that's not really my concern. My concerns are the other ones. Phase 2, there's the sucrose. Phase 3 is the alcohol oils. It's the antibiotics. And the last piece of all this, right? The last 70 years is phase 3. So that what came there was the antibiotics, which is in all our food and the animals and so on and so forth. We've talked about that in this video up here. We have high omega-6 because grains from the agricultural revolution became so popular. You had high omega-6, very little omega-3, and the alcohol sugars made for even more, went down the same pathway as fructose, the same pathway as alcohol, and kept on creating more endogenous purines. And so it's an inside job from the alcohol to the fructose, from the sucrose to the additives now in our foods of the antibiotics and the alcohol sugars and the high omega-6. So there's even more to that in this last 70 years. The last part of the last 70 years that is perhaps as critical as everything I've said so far is the deficiencies that we have because of this overnutrition, because of processed foods and everything else. And that is three things that we'll talk about and get into the research later. That is vitamin D deficiency directly elevates uric acid. Omega-3 deficiency directly. And how does, when I say directly omega-3 allows, omega-6 keeps in, when you have high omega-6, it keeps in the uric acid and doesn't allow it to be excreted. Omega-3 does just the opposite. It allows it to be excreted. So it doesn't make purines. It just doesn't allow the purines to be excreted. That is the omega-6. So when we're omega-3 deficiency and omega-6 high, we have a problem. We have a big problem. Vitamin D deficiency, vitamin 6 excess, and the last one is vitamin C. Vitamin C. You go, well, wait a minute, how can anybody have vitamin C? I don't see people walking around the streets here with scurvy. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's true. Well, it's low grade population-wide cultural, unless those people take vitamin C and they're smart enough to have that. Most people actually don't take very much in the way of fruit. Most people don't take much in the way of supplements that they need. So we have an ongoing vitamin C deficiency. And so vitamin C is another one that basically the deficiency keeps the uric acid from being excreted. So you start adding these things together, it makes perfect sense that we not only have gout, which is a low-level correlation of uric acid, but the biggest concerns for elevated uric acid are the cardiovascular, the cerebrovascular, the Alzheimer's, the dementia. It goes on and on. So fructose is a big key with this. But it's not the only story. If we were just having starches, if we were just having sucrose, that was all our diet, which obviously is not the case for really anybody, that would be a problem. But what has happened and escalated in the last 70 years, and this whole series I've been doing on uric acid is about why do we have so much concern now with the elevated uric acid? Why do we have cognitive decline? Why do we have Alzheimer's screaming off the charts? Why do we have cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, all the other things, and diabetes and obesity, all the other things that are associated? Well, the reason we have that is because we've now piled on the other things that either don't allow us to excrete uric acid or create more purines endogenously by taxing the liver. So there you go. That's the long story of all this. And the pieces need to be sort of put out there and discussed. So I'll get back to my pate, my Paleolithic snack, and talk to you next time. Hi, I just forgot to mention that while you're listening to these different episodes, whether they're from a long time ago or something I'm doing currently each week, feel absolutely free to send me a question. Say, hey, while I was listening to you, this is what I thought. What are your takes on this? The reason I'm asking you to do that often opens up a whole avenue of thinking and thoughts, and even something I can explore for a future episode. So from a simple question to something more complicated, or explain your situation, I won't get back to you necessarily right away in a couple hours, but give it a couple days, maybe even a week or so. But I pretty much get back to everybody who has a legitimate question, and I give them a legitimate answer. And sometimes if I don't know or can't give them a very specific answer, I say, I will look into it and I'll make an episode of this. So feel free to communicate. I hope you enjoy what we're going over. This is meant to be you and me on a walk together. Kind of, I'm talking to you, but you can talk back to me should you want to. Till next time, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.